I'm Jeff Asher, and this is the Jeff-alytics podcast. Policing has always been shaped by technology. What's different now is how quickly it's happening. Tools that sounded experimental a couple of years ago or even a couple of months ago are already sitting inside real departments, affecting how officers actually write reports, how supervisors review body cam footage, and how agencies think about accountability. In this episode, I'm joined by Ian Adams, who's a former police officer turned researcher and professor at the University of South Carolina. Ian studies how emerging technologies, and especially AI, are actually being used in policing and where the promises don't necessarily match reality. We talk about what AI in policing looks like on the ground, from using body-worn camera footage to generate feedback on officer communication, to the idea that AI can dramatically speed up report writing. Ian breaks down one project that measurably improved officer behavior and another that failed to deliver the efficiency gains everyone expected, despite officers thinking it had. This episode examines how technology is being tested in real departments and what the future of these technologies might look like. My guest today is Ian Adams. Ian, thank you so much for joining the program.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm very happy to be here.
First question to all the guests, walk me through your background. What brought you here today?
Yeah, a series of misfortunate events that ended well, I suppose. I was a police officer, so I was in law enforcement for close to 13 years. Then did some labor executive sort of management stuff while I was doing my PhD there at the University of Utah. I come from a political science sort of policy evaluation background, but all my work in grad school and since has been in policing. And so I ended up in a criminology and criminal justice department at the University of South Carolina, and that's where I still hang out now.
And so a lot of your work has centered on, and what I'm excited to talk about this. I guess I only hear about it when it's in the news, which probably makes it not as useful of a knowledge base. But you study AI in policing. Why look at that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of grew out of just a general fascination with technology. I've always been a bit of a hobbyist in technology and what we used to just call machine learning, but now gets called artificial intelligence in some ways. Where it started for me was in, I don't know, early 90s. I was one of those kids who liked to build PCs back in the day. And I don't know if you remember, but back then, the audio card was not embedded into the motherboard, right? It wasn't built in. It was kind of like video cards are today. You would slot it in. You would purchase it separate. Anyway, there's an old manufacturer of sound cards was called Sound Blaster, and when you ordered a Sound Blaster card, you got this little floppy disk that came with a little program called Dr. Sabetsu, and what it was really just like a text puzzle, right? Like it sort of mimicked being able to have a conversation, but I was pretty fascinated with it. And that just over the decades kind of stayed consistent for me as something I was interested in. So when when early versions of GPT started to come out in like 2017, and it was all an open source project back then, I was in grad school at a good point to sort of take advantage of that and continue to monitor it. And then I naturally started seeing a lot of my research was around body-worn cameras at the time. That was the big technology that was being studied. And I saw an opportunity and an interest in the artificial intelligence piece, started seeing agencies and officers begin to use these products on their own or sort of off-the-shelf commercial products as they became available. And so I've been extremely fortunate to have the good luck to be in that space just as it was sort of starting to emerge.
So I'll put you on the spot. Massive question here.
Okay.
If you were to summarize, how are police departments using AI?
Great, poorly, a lot, and not at all. It's a wild world, right? Police agencies are extremely varied in the U.S. The number we like to kind of throw around is there's about 18,000 local or state agencies. The mean or the average size of that agency is somewhere between 12 to 15 officers, which means, half of the agencies in the country, less than 20 officers for sure. The agencies we normally think about, like the bigger ones, let's say over 100, that's just about 6% of the agencies or so. And so what you've started to see like a concentration of technology in some of the largest agencies. So you have large agencies that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in Axon packages for body cameras, tra- uh, 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 real-time translation, evidence storage, drones, report writing. And then you have some agencies that don't have any of that technology at all. The degree to which they are able to use them wisely, I think, is still an open question as the technology develops, and certainly an area where we're trying to contribute to that research base.
And does the public have really any awareness of how these tools are being used? Is this just a way for the police to use it, or is this something that you think that there's at least a conversation understanding of the trade-offs that come with using more advanced technologies, especially as you get into, you know, civil liberties and surveillance and things like that?
Certainly, there's some public awareness of this. My one of my teams in a paper that was led by Kaylin Schiff at Purdue about a year ago, we put out what we found was that the public is actually pretty trusting of at least local police, their local sheriffs, police departments, that sort of thing, as compared to federal agencies. They're pretty or they are pretty trusting of those local agencies to use this technology, and pretty demanding that they do. So the public is expecting agencies to sort of keep up to date, regardless of the sort of ability of the agency to afford and use that technology well. There are some differences as there always are in the U.S., around partisanship. So the more left-leaning respondents really wanted to see agencies using this kind of technology for internal controls, right? To bring more accountability and transparency to police departments. Whereas respondents who might lean more to the right, what we saw was a pattern where they really wanted agencies to be using these tools for external crime-fighting reasons. And that gets to one of the difficulties of these conversations is what do we mean when we say police are using AI? Do we mean like police are using AI to help write reports, sort of an internal operational piece? Or do we mean we want police or don't want police using AI in surveillance capabilities on the outside of the agency, sort of think Flock and other technologies companies that are more aimed at collecting information and feeding it into the investigative pipeline. The same person might have very different views about those two uses, let alone sort of the panoply of uses that we might imagine agencies could use.
So I guess let's start at kind of the middle then. Body worn cameras is something that I think that AI has been used for and that you've studied. What have you found about how are police departments using AI to supplement their body worn cameras? And is it impactful of making their departments more efficient, or is there just nothing happening?
Yeah, let's underline that word efficiency because it'll come up again, I think, in the rest of the conversation. But just to answer your questions, so body cameras come around, begin rapidly adopting in the United States around 2015. They immediately start producing a tsunami of data storage problems and data review problems. The basic problem is that for every hour of body worn camera footage, to give that a good audit, to really review it, takes at least one human hour, right? And so we just don't have the capacity within law enforcement, or really probably within the United States, to adequately review all that body worn camera footage. So all the sort of hoped for benefits of body cameras, right? Maybe they produce better training, maybe they can produce better transparency. All those problems never really get solved because we don't have a way of actually looking at the body camera footage to determine any of that. This was my insight in grad school, and basically what I wrote my dissertation on was, well, what if we could use advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence to audit 100% of that footage, extract information out of it, and use that as sort of a database that we can then get information back out of that huge data storage. Um, Agencies, that technology soon became available in the early 2020s. There's a company called Trulio that is sort of the original company doing that and still doing it today. And so beginning in 2022, my team set out and started up an experiment an RCT in two places. One was Aurora, Colorado. One was Richland County, South Carolina. And what we wanted to do there was see if see if Trulio's approach was successful in changing officer behavior for the better. And this is what they do. They take the audio from every one of those body cameras, get a transcript, and then use machine learning and natural language programming to extract features of that conversation, the officer's language, the civilian's language, and then in real time feed that back to the officers in near real time, I should say. So think about it this way. You're an officer, you're on patrol, you've had 8 hours of work the previous day. When you come in today, you have a dashboard that can tell you basically a grade of how you did the previous day. Did you use a lot of explanatory language? That would be considered highly professional. Did you use maybe threatening or profanity or insults, right? That would be kind of a low grade. Or did you just kind of do standard professional work? Well, what we found at the end of 1 year of experimenting across these two agencies was that, yes, officers actually do use that sort of self-learning mode to improve their professionalism. In other words, in Aurora, we found a very high decrease in the amount of unprofessional language. So the insults, the threats, the sort of the language we don't want to see officers using with members of the public. And in Richland, we saw the opposite. Instead of raising the floor, it raised the ceiling, meaning like officers began using up to, I think, about 80% more explanatory language with the public about why they were there, and why they were doing what they were doing. So what we saw was basically a consistent picture across these two large agencies of the AI feedback loop improving police professionalism.
Is there any look at sort of the efficiency landscape from a supervisor perspective? Does it make it easier for management to basically go through all of this footage and find either reasons to commend or reasons to discipline, or is the AI not being used for that?
I think we can think about that as an efficiency issue, right? I mean, the problem is in business as usual in agencies, often supervisors are required or requested at least to audit some small number of these videos per month. But I want you to put yourself in a really busy sergeant's shoes for a minute. And you're supposed to review, let's say, 5 of your squad's videos per week. Which videos do you think you select? Probably not the ones that are 6 hours long on a standoff, right? You probably pick ones that are a little bit easier to deal with. Now, some agencies have tried to impose a randomization schedule on that to greater or lesser success. But the ultimate problem is that you don't have enough time to actually review even one officer's 40-hour week, let alone 5 or 6 officers' 40-hour weeks. I think of it less as efficiency and more as a step change in the gain on actually auditing all the videos. It makes it easier for the sergeant or supervisor to surface that information without actually doing a second-by-second audit yourself. But I want to point out something important. The channel that I talked about on improving professionalism operates differently when that information is provided directly back to the officer versus through a supervisory channel. So I didn't really get into all the details, but in this experiment, we randomly assigned officers to either business as usual control or a self-learning sort of mode where that Trulio-based information is coming directly back to the officer, or a supervisory mode where the information goes to their supervisor and then gets translated to the officer. We saw lesser effects on the supervisory channel when we're talking about increasing the highly professional behavior using that explanatory language. But we saw greater effects in the improving low professionalism when that information was coming from the supervisor. So it's a complex study, it's a complex area, but the general lesson coming out of it is that when we want to think about an agency improving the highly professional behavior of its officers, it looks like we probably get our best bang for the buck by providing that information directly back to the officers themselves. But when we want to sort of reduce unwanted behavior, sort of deter unwanted behavior, having that supervisor in the loop seemed to get the best effects.
So, uh, kind of switching gears, obviously, this is like very minutia switching gears, but um, looking at report writing, there's a very famous story, I guess, that made the rounds earlier this year of a police department that was using software, AI reporting software to basically capture what was happening, and it didn't go so well. Can you walk me through that incident and then also what that says about kind of the other side of the coin of using AI to improve efficiency, very much on the back end in terms of improving your efficiency with report writing?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the Princess and the Frog out of Heber,
Yes.
Utah. Yeah, that's my old stomping grounds. I come from Utah, so I'm quite familiar with the area. This is a smaller agency, and they were testing out Axon's Draft One product. So Axon is probably the largest technology provider in the space, right? They're the manufacturer of the Taser, for example, but they have their hands in a lot of different technology, advanced technology sectors, including report writing. They were the first to launch this Draft One product. And what happens in the Draft One product is similar to the Trulio approach, right? We're going to take a body camera, we're going to separate out the audio and generate a transcript. And then what the Draft One does is it sends that transcript along with a set of custom instructions that the officer doesn't really see. But if you've used ChatGPT before, think about it as giving some directions to the to ChatGPT on how to create a police report from this transcript. So that goes out, it hits the OpenAI API, and it returns the first draft, right? Thus the name Draft One, to the officer within the software program. The officer has to make some changes to it, and then submits, and then is able to like sort of copy and paste that over into their agency's report management system and submit the report. But what happened in Heber, unfortunately, is a breakdown in a couple places. First, the officer was responding to apparently a domestic call, and in the background of that domestic call was a Disney movie, Princess and the Frog. So if the dialogue from Princess and the Frog was recorded on the transcript. This transcript then got sent out to the API. It returned a police report in which the officer was apparently turned into a frog. And then the officer apparently didn't edit that report at all before submission. And so that's a problem. That's a big problem. But importantly, is it a technology problem or is it a people problem? And we run into that quite a bit in this area. That one seems to me to be a people problem, right? The technology actually operated kind of how we asked it to. It's taking a transcript and it's creating a report. Why it's creating a report where the officer turns into a frog, who knows? But the safeguard in that system is supposed to be the officer. The officer is supposed to be reviewing that report for accuracy and completeness before submitting. And it sounds like maybe that didn't happen. So that did not accomplish its efficiency goals, obviously, and probably a bunch of other goals as well.
There's probably a good movie script coming out of that, though. I feel like you're like 90% of the way there.
I'm not a big fan of the police procedurals, but I'd watch that one, yeah.
So, is this the solution here better technology, or is this one where, come on, guys, like the software tells you what to do and you didn't do it?
Yeah, we're always gonna have human failure, right? And so, like, we probably shouldn't judge an entire class of products off of that story, as amusing as it is. But, my team did produce the first and only experimental evidence on this type of technology about a year ago. So we teamed up with an agency that was testing out that same Draft One product. A very simple approach, right? What we were interested in is testing whether the software was actually able to improve efficiencies, because the number one claim, like the marketing claim that Axon was using and still uses, is that this will massively speed up officer report writing time and save a lot of time for the officers so they can get back out there onto the road and do more productive tasks. In fact, Axon claimed that it would save a very specific number, 82% of an officer's time, which is a weirdly specific number, right? My team set out, and what we did was we assigned half of patrol to business as usual. They were just going to write reports as usual. Half of the officers had access to the Draft One tool and were able to create reports within Draft One. And at the end of that, we were measuring how long did it take those officers from the time they began a report to the time they submitted it. And what we found was not an 82% savings. In fact, we found a null. It didn't help save any time at all. Certainly a surprise to me. Admittedly, my priors were sort of going into this study were that, sure, of course, AI, I'd use ChatGPT. Of course, it's going to like sort of help on the efficiency front. But not only did we find it didn't work there, that's not a policing only story. There's been a couple other studies that have come out since in both sort of medical record keeping and in computer programming that have found similar, if even negative results. So in the computer programming study, for example, set up very similar to ours, but what they're asking is, can that same sort of approach, can AI help computer programs become more efficient? And what it found was actually a 19% loss in time. So, and then in the medical records attempt, they found basically a null as well. So there's sort of an emerging consensus in these studies that the hoped for efficiency gains are running into contexts, professional contexts, that sort of hinder or even prevent those same hoped for efficiency gains.
What are some of the things that would prevent those gains from being realized?
Yeah, policing has a very specific issue. One, and that is the technology stack. So if you've ever hung out in a police department, you're going to find out that they have incredibly complex, idiosyncratic technology stacks. What I mean by that is, it might, if you were naive and new to policing, you might imagine that two systems, that is their report management system, where officers write reports, store digital evidence, link everything together, and the CAD, which is the computer-aided dispatch system. That's how officers get dispatched from the dispatch center. It's sort of a mapping and incident tracking type of software. You might imagine, like naively, that those two things probably work really well together, maybe even from the same technology manufacturer or vendor. But what you'd find out is like, no, these things were adopted at different points in history, developed by very different people. Like, it might have been, your RMS might have been developed by somebody's like 14-year-old nephew in 1982 on COBOL. And like, it's never been updated since. And the CAD is like super advanced and very up to date. So they don't sit in the same part of the technology stack. They don't even talk to each other in many places. And then a second feature is that maybe we're thinking about the police quote unquote police report wrong. The police report is more than just a narrative. The police report is a very complex data entry process. In the agency we were studying, for example, there were up to, I think, more than 200 separate text entries that an officer could make, right? They're not going to be making them for every incident, but could make outside of just typing up the narrative, recounting of sort of what they did and what they saw and what they learned as part of their investigation. And so the sort of AI generated narrative might save you, even if it did save you a little bit of time, it's not going to save you any time on sort of some of the main activities that an officer has to do in order to complete the report. So we should probably expect less marginal gains then if it's just one piece of that whole puzzle. Those are just two of the basic problems. The third is that not every call actually generates a transcript, right? So like a lot of calls that officers take that still need to have a report are done over the phone and won't have that sort of transcript of a conversation going on between them and somebody in the public. So we shouldn't expect that this is a sort of silver bullet that can solve the 100-year-old problem of how do we get officers to write better, faster reports.
So what do officers think about sort of the effectiveness of these tools? Are they annoyed by it, or do they think that this can change everything that they do?
Yeah, good question, because we went back. So our second study in that same department, what we wanted to find out is, how did those same officers think about the technology that we had just allowed them to use? And we found some fascinating stuff. First, officers are pretty positive about this wave of technology. They're pretty excited about it. They're somewhere between neutral and positive. And that is a little bit of a surprise, just if you think about it in the context of body cameras, right? When body cameras were first sort of introduced into the policing workspace, they were received quite negatively. They were seen as maybe a tool of where management was going to use them as a fishing expedition to find small policy violations and jam officers up. But they sort of quickly became very, very popular within policing. So if you ask officers today about body cameras, they're very positive. On this AI report writing front, what we found was somewhere between neutral to very positive, basically across the entire department, from the officers to their sergeants. But then a really fascinating thing showed up in our analysis. About half of the officers told us this technology definitely helped them write faster reports, right? They were in fact endorsing that marketing message that Axon was using. And so we went back and we looked because, of course, we have records of those officers in black and white data. Like, I can actually find out. And lo and behold, what we found out was there was this huge gap between perception and reality. The officers were telling us it's saving them time. But when we go look at their actual records, we see, like, no, it's not saving them any time at all. And so that's one of the things I like to warn police executives about, especially, is that if you don't do a careful evaluation here, you might be misled. If you just do a traditional sort of check-in with the troops, how's it going? Did you like the technology? Did it work? That might give you one answer that's very, very different than a sort of more rigorous approach where we're looking at the underlying data.
Do we have any idea why that is? Is it like, I'm thinking that, I can either sit at this traffic stop and it's going to take 10 minutes to get through all of this construction, or I can go the other way around and it's going to take 10 minutes to go the other way around, but at least I'll be driving and I'll feel like I'm doing something. Is that the same thing, but for police officers?
I think you're onto something there. The honest academic answer is, like, we don't know the pure mechanism that's causing this discrepancy, right? To be clear. But it's probably something like that, or probably something like, hey, if I come in and you're an officer, you're doing a difficult job. It is a challenging work environment. There's a lot of time pressure. There's a lot of task pressure. Every single year, call volume goes up, right? Even as over the last 5 years, there's been pretty significant labor pressures within policing, meaning we don't have as many officers as we need to answer all those calls. So if you're in that environment and somebody comes in and says, hey, I've got a magic tool that's going to save you all kinds of time, I think it's just human nature to kind of feel like, yeah, that saved me some time. There's a bit of confirmation bias. But again, who knows about the exact mechanisms? I know there's Brandon May is a psychologist down in Florida who's very interested in this technology. And that's more his interest, is like, what exactly is occurring in the sort of perception boundary of this problem. But what I can tell you is that right now, as far as the most rigorous evidence in the world is concerned, there was no time savings. And yet about half of the officers using the technology said they perceived that it was. And so we should be aware of that when we're trying to sort of, on balance, figure out, is this technology worth the huge dollars that agencies are being asked to put towards it? So just as one example, in that agency that we studied, the cost for just the Draft One product was equal to about 11% of this agency's after labor budget.
Jeez.
Right? So, like, this agency has about a $32 million budget a year. But in policing, somewhere around 95%. In this agency, I think it was 96%. 96% of its budget goes directly to sort of paying the troops and making sure that they can answer 911 calls and investigate crimes. So you have about 2.2 million left over. And the cost for just the Draft One piece was around 11% of that per year. And it's, chiefs and sheriffs are under a lot of budget pressure all the time. They always need more to do more. And so asking them to spend 11% of their budget on a product that isn't having the primary effect that was promised is probably too much to ask. And we don't really know functionally how much agencies are actually spending in the US. I mean, we can observe quarterly earning reports from Axon and know that in some of their latest big dollar contracts, they're getting to about $600 per officer per month in annual recurring revenue. So that can give you some idea of the dollars at stake, but it doesn't tell us in aggregate how much is being spent, because of course that's just one vendor, albeit the biggest one.
Is there a happy medium between how AI can best serve policing and how police departments can responsibly and effectively and efficiently integrate AI?
Well, yes, at least in theory, right? I mean, that's part of the process that's occurring right now across the United States in different agencies and different jurisdictions. This is a good time to give a shout out to the Council on Criminal Justice. I sit on the AI task force at the Council on Criminal Justice, so I quite like that organization, especially it has a pretty even-handed approach to this sort of thing. And what's coming out of those sort of meetings is, one, it's really hard to come up with the answer to the question on everybody's mind, which is sort of like, is it worth it, right? It's some sort of balancing question. Is it worth, what benefits can we get? What risks are we trading off on? That's ultimately a big public policy question. To the degree that it's useful to have an empirical grounding for that question, I would say we are nowhere near knowing the answer to either the benefits or the costs, right? Like I've covered two evaluations of AI in policing. One of them, we saw really important effects, right? It's important that officers behave professionally when they're dealing with members of the public. In the other, we got a big null, right? That same technology didn't save officers time when they're generating reports. That's not much of an empirical basis to proceed on in like a policy question. But I would also argue that we are confronting the exact same, if not worse, picture when it comes to the risks. We don't even know really how to define the risks. I think they sort of get baked into questions about the surveillance and constitutional questions and due process, all of which are super interesting and important. But we are absent in empirical record of showing like that stuff actually shows up somewhere in the data. And so I'm a data guy. That's where I live. It doesn't mean that those more normative questions aren't important. But when we want to ultimately get to the sort of end question of those normative discussions, I think that it's helpful to have good data. We just need more of it. We need more researchers, more research funding, more time, and more agencies willing to do the hard evaluations up front to sort of get ahead of that bad outcome where agencies are spending 10, 11% of their budget on a technology that feels good but isn't actually doing anything.
Do you get a sense that this is something, I mean, before we went on, we were talking about Claude Code and just how incredible the advances have been over, what, 6 months? Is that,
Well, and
3
I would
months?
even say like a month, right? Like
Yeah.
I would say in the last month that thing has taken off.
Is
Yeah.
this something where just the conversation we're having now today in early 2026 will be just completely null and void, and the technology will have advanced to the point where it'll be completely new in 6 months, a year from now?
There's a big part of me that always has that in the back of my mind when I'm talking about these things, right? Just like the academic's worst nightmare of being wrong at some point. But the answer is like, of course, things are going to change. There is a counterweight to that, and that is that policing is an inherently conservative, like small c conservative institution. It doesn't move quick. And so we have time. I am a technology optimist. Sometimes people hear about the report writing study and they think I'm a technology hater. It's like, no, that's just what the experiment showed. I actually think that we are, today is the worst that any of these technologies will ever be. Next month, we're going to be in a much better spot, and let alone in 10 months. So yes, the world will look a lot different. I sometimes, when I'm talking to police executives, like to use the pager metaphor. So I ask them, like, who here remembers getting a pager for the first time? And usually there's somebody around who started in maybe their late 90s, and they remember getting a pager and how cool it was. And then they remember getting the first time they got a mobile phone and a laptop in their car. And I asked them, like, well, if I had asked you back in 97 to predict what technology looks like today from that pager, could you have done it? And the answer is always no. And yet you lived through 30 years of a profession relatively rapidly adopting modern technology into police practices. We will find a way. There will be a new normal at some point. We're living through probably the fastest technology adoption cycle that we've ever seen, right? I would argue that AI is being adopted much faster than body-worn cameras were, let alone laptops and all that technology. But eventually we'll get there. The safer we can do it with good research, the better.
Can I ask you about Force Science?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
didn't expect you
alright.
to, but you certainly can. Yeah.
Good. Well, I had seen some of it, and I watched the full upload of the video for the perf. So I want to talk about this just because you're here, and I think this is fascinating and such a good example of just sort of ethics and responsibly approaching research and data. What is Force Science, and sort of what is the controversy, the issue that you've been looking at?
Yeah. Okay. So Force Science is a private company. It's a vendor. It's a training vendor mostly that is very, very widespread in policing. They position themselves in the market as a scientific voice that can give scientific information about what happens in sort of the most critical incidents in policing, right? Use of force, shootings, that sort of thing. That's their bread and butter. They hold dozens and dozens and dozens of trainings across the United States every year, training officers and investigators in this purportedly scientific approach. The problem is, of course, when you have a scientific background and you begin to look at their scientific corpus, the collection of studies that they say they've put together, anybody that's taken even a very basic research design course will look at one of their studies and be horrified, right? Extremely small sample sizes, samples that were not just convenient, but super conveniently sampled, bad reporting, incomplete reporting, inferring to generalized populations that weren't even tested in the original study. It's pretty bad. It's really, really bad. So, my team published a study last year that reviewed all of their studies, right? They put them all together in a book and they said, these are our most critical studies, our 24 most critical studies. And we just sent each study through very basic scientific review processes, right? You may have heard of like the Maryland scale, which is widely used in criminology to sort of judge a study or a set of studies on its ability to safely inform policy, for example. But we used two others. That's the details may not matter as much, but if you're interested, the paper's available at Police Quarterly. And at the end of it, we basically found that across this corpus, there was very, very low scientific reliability, meaning they just didn't follow basic, normal scientific processes in either the design, the execution, or the reporting of those studies, and thus should not form a reliable basis for police training or evaluation. Um, you called it controversial. It certainly is. That study was raised eyebrows because this is a company that is well received within policing, right? They're well loved. They give pseudoscientific answers that officers often want to hear. I was one of those officers once, by the way. I've been through the force science training, and there's something quite seductive when you're an officer and you're sitting in a room and they're parading a bunch of people who insist on being called doctor in front of you, and they tell you the answers you want to hear, and they say, not only that, that's what science says. That's if you don't have a scientific background and don't know how to evaluate that information, that could be a pretty seductive message. All of us like to be told what we were hoping to hear, but science doesn't give us the answers we were hoping to hear, right? That's not how science works. Science doesn't promise some answer. It promises answers to well-constructed questions that we can sort of know how that scientific answer came to be and evaluate it. The unfortunate reality is that when Force Science and I met for a debate at the Perf Town Hall this last October, they didn't send a scientist to defend their results, and they haven't ever really even tried to rehabilitate those results. They sent a lawyer, right? That's who they sent to debate. I see myself as one of the people who has the unique perspective of a street cop, somebody who's been through force science, somebody who has a rigorous scientific education, and I think contributes usefully to scientific conversations in policing. And so hopefully we can sort of keep pushing, because I think it's really, really important that agencies do have a scientific evidence base when it's available to help guide them in their operations. Like, that is the best approach. We know that's the best approach from all kinds of professions, right? Policing's no different. And what I don't want to see is sort of a universal distaste for scientific information that comes out of that, right? That's not my goal. My goal is to improve the scientific evidence base and scientific knowledge and education and make police agencies better consumers of that information ultimately.
That's great. And if anybody's interested, the video is available on YouTube through the Police Executive Research Forum. So I think it's a great listen. And even if you have no background in it, I think it was very interesting. And many of the nerds that have, I think, been on this podcast or will eventually be on this podcast made an appearance there. So it was fascinating to watch. Ian, what's next for you?
Man, I am super excited about Claude Code and other agentic coding. I'm super excited about the ability to maybe use some of these tools to improve investigative processes. In policing, we have a real terrible problem with solving specific types of crimes. Just as an example, right? You and your listeners will be well aware that we don't solve every murder in the United States. But even worse are the ones that are near murders. So it's oftentimes the difference between a shooting that results in a death and the shooting that results in a life-altering injury is nothing more than stochastic chance. It's just randomness. Where that exactly that bullet lands in your body, a millimeter this way or that way. But our solve rate on murders hovers around nationally around 60%. You'd be better on that number.
Yeah, that's about right.
It gets under 20%, sometimes close to 10% on these attempted murders by gunfire. And like, we know that those two types of events are very, very alike one another. And so we shouldn't see that big of a gap in solve rate. So why are we seeing that solve rate? Well, there's something about investigative effort that's going on, right? I know cops, they care about those cases too. But if you are a murder cop in LA or Albuquerque or Houston, you've got a pretty big caseload. And a lot of those are going to be both homicide and near homicide. So your investigative effort, there's only so many hours in a day. So how can we use technology to better improve those processes is something that I see a lot of companies attacking right now. To be clear, I don't develop. I'm not a developer. I'm an evaluator. But I see these agencies beginning to experiment with that technology, and I'm super excited about like maybe we can actually get a handle on that problem sometime in the next year or two.
That's great. And I know that that is a fascinating question of we've had all of these advances in the last 25 years,
Right.
and yet the murder clearance rate is basically slightly lower than it was 25 years ago.
Right. And the other technology that I'm very excited about, and it is being used more often than people know, is drones in policing. And there's a couple different ways to use drones. Like in the last 10 years, you've seen a real upswelling of drones in the police car, right? Drones as operational response, meaning there's a cop in a car and he can get the drone out if he wants and maybe use it sporadically. We haven't seen good evaluations of that, to be clear, and adoption has been rather stumbly, let's say. But over the last year or two, we've started to see DFR drones as first responders. And I've had the chance to sit in at agencies watching this technology work. And in fact, my one of my teams has an active dual site RCT in two large American cities right now using this technology. This is different. These sit on pods on the top of buildings and are able to, in one of our cities, get on top of a reported incident within 72 seconds of the call, not the dispatched call. So, just as a reminder of how this process works, somebody calls 911. You are talking to a call taker. Usually takes a few minutes to get information before that information is dispatched out to the police officer for actual response. So there's already like this 2-minute gap, and that's before it takes, the officer a few minutes to a long time to get to that actual call. Well, these agencies are able to have sergeants and corporal pilots who are already experienced officers who are hearing the 911 call come in real time and make a quick snap decision about whether to get a drone up and going towards that location right now and be over that target on average within 72 seconds of that call.
Oh,
That's
wow.
a huge change. Has tons of opportunity, not only for like the public service piece of this, people like fast police response, to be clear. So like that's an important sort of primary goal. But unknown and still unproven is like, can we get better operational outcomes out of this as well? Can we get better suspect IDs in violent crimes? Can we, instead of sending a bunch of officers into a foot pursuit, can we use the drone technology to sort of make for a safer environment, not only for the officers, but for the subject themselves? So there's all kinds of questions to come. I think we'll get some of those answers here in the next 6 months.
That's awesome. Well, excited to hear about that. We'll have to have you back on later this year then.
Anytime. Yeah.
All right. Ian, thanks so much for coming.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Jeff-alytics podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and to learn more, head on over to ahdatalytics.com for more information and previous episodes. If you like what you heard, please leave a glowing review, which will help others to discover the show. Until next time, I'm Jeff Asher.